"That's not your son," I said, pressing play on the video. Dad jumped up, knocking over 2 wine glasses as he lunged toward me. "Turn that OFF now," he shouted, his face turning pale. I looked at my golden boy brother across the room. For the first time in 35 years, I saw real fear in James's face, not the usual confidence of a successful surgeon, but genuine terror. Mom grabbed the tablecloth, desperately shaking her head and mouthing "please" over and over. But it was too late. I'd spent my entire life being the family disappointment, the forgotten son. Today, I was finally going to be heard. I pressed play. My parents' 40th anniversary celebration had started like any other Morrison family gathering, with me being an afterthought. The grand ballroom of Seattle's Olympic Hotel glittered with champagne flutes and carefully selected guests. 200 of Seattle's elite gathered to celebrate the perfect union of Robert and Helen Morrison. The chandelier light caught in the diamonds around my mother's neck as she laughed at something the mayor whispered in her ear. James, the surgeon, the pride of the family, had given a moving speech about our parents' perfect marriage that had everyone dabbing their eyes. To 40 years of unconditional love, he'd toasted. The crowd murmured in appreciation, glasses raised in a constellation of crystal and expensive champagne. Meanwhile, I was seated at the far end of the family table, introduced to distant relatives as Alex, the photographer. The hesitation before my profession had become so familiar I barely noticed it anymore. The quick recovery smile that never quite reached their eyes. "How interesting," they'd say before inevitably asking if I'd considered real careers. James had a wall of medical degrees. I had a passion for capturing moments nobody in my family thought mattered. In the Morrison family hierarchy, the difference might as well have been between a king and a court jester. 2 hours into the party, Dad clinked his Waterford crystal glass for attention. "We have another surprise," he announced, beaming with a smile that transformed his usually stern face. "James and Sarah are expecting our first grandchild." The room erupted in applause. Mom rushed to hug my brother and his wife, tears of joy streaming down her face, while Dad clapped James on the back, proclaiming, "The Morrison legacy continues." 3 years ago, when I'd mentioned possibly wanting children someday, Mom had changed the subject so quickly it gave me conversational whiplash. I sat frozen at my isolated corner of the table, gripping my camera. No one had even glanced my way to see my reaction. The invisible sun, as always. That's when I felt it, the weight of the flash drive in my pocket. Digital conversion of the old VHS tape I'd found last week while clearing out my childhood bedroom. The one innocuously labeled Family Beach Trip 93 in my mother's neat handwriting. I'd watched it alone in my apartment, thinking it might contain happy memories. Instead, it had revealed the foundation of lies my entire identity was built upon. I stood up, walking purposefully toward the projector setup meant for the anniversary slideshow. My heart hammered in my chest, but my hands remained steady as I connected my laptop and inserted the drive. "Alex," my mother called, her voice carrying that familiar warning tone she'd used whenever I threatened to embarrass the family. "What are you doing?" "Sharing some family memories," I replied, my voice stronger than I expected. A few heads turned, curious but not particularly interested. The invisible sun rarely did anything worth noticing. James approached quickly, champagne glass still in hand. "Hey, little brother," he said, voice low. "Let's not hijack Mom and Dad's big day, okay?" I met his eyes. "You'll want to see this." The projector hummed to life, casting its blue glow across the grand ballroom's wall. The first few minutes showed exactly what the label promised: our family at the beach. 10-year-old James building an award-worthy sandcastle while I, 7 years old, hovered nearby, desperately trying to help only to be shooed away. Then the scene changed. Dad had forgotten to stop recording when he set the camera down on our beach house deck later that night. His voice came through with perfect, damning clarity as he spoke on the phone, scotch in hand. "I can't take it anymore, Margaret. The boy looks just like me, thank God. The other one? Who knows, doesn't have any of my features. Sometimes I look at him and just see her betrayal staring back at me." That's when I paused the video and spoke the words that would shatter our family forever. "That's not your son." My parents' 40th anniversary celebration had started like any other Morrison family gathering, with me being an afterthought. The grand ballroom of Seattle's Olympic Hotel glittered with champagne flutes and carefully selected guests. 200 of Seattle's elite gathered to celebrate the perfect union of Robert and Helen Morrison. The chandelier light caught in the diamonds around my mother's neck, casting fractured rainbows across her collarbones as she laughed at something the mayor whispered in her ear. My brother James, the surgeon, the pride of the family, had given a moving speech about our parents' perfect marriage that had everyone dabbing their eyes. To 40 years of unconditional love, he toasted, his voice carrying the same authoritative resonance he probably used to reassure patients before cutting them open. To the example they set for everyone fortunate enough to know them. The crowd murmured in appreciation, glasses raised toward the ceiling in a constellation of crystal and expensive champagne. Meanwhile, I was seated at the far end of the family table, introduced to distant relatives as Alex, the photographer. The hesitation before my profession had become so familiar I barely noticed it anymore. The slight downward flick of the eyes, the quick recovery smile that never quite reached their eyes. How interesting, they'd say, before inevitably asking if I'd considered real careers or if I made actual money with my camera. I'd learned to smile through it, to pretend the dismissal didn't cut to the bone. James had a wall of medical degrees. I had a passion for capturing moments nobody in my family thought mattered. James saved lives. I preserved memories. In the Morrison family hierarchy, the difference might as well have been between a king and a court jester. 2 hours into the party, Dad clinked his Waterford crystal glass for attention. The sound rang out like a bell, silencing conversations mid-sentence. He stood tall and imposing in his tailored tuxedo. At 65, still powerful, still commanding every room, he entered with the confidence of a man who had never doubted his place in the world. "We have another surprise," he announced, beaming with a smile that transformed his usually stern face. "James and Sarah are expecting our first grandchild." The room erupted in applause and delighted gasps. Mom rushed to hug my brother and his wife, tears of joy streaming freely down her face, while Dad clapped James on the back, proclaiming, "The Morrison legacy continues." I could see it in his eyes, the fierce pride, the satisfaction of bloodline continuity, the doctor's son producing another potential doctor. I sat frozen at my isolated corner of the table, gripping my camera so tightly my knuckles turned white. The weight of their collective joy pressed against my chest, making it difficult to breathe. 3 years ago, when I'd mentioned possibly wanting children someday, Mom had changed the subject so quickly it gave me conversational whiplash. Now, she was practically glowing at the prospect of James's offspring. No one had even glanced my way to see my reaction. The invisible son, as always. James caught my eye across the room and raised his glass slightly, an acknowledgement, perhaps even an apology. But then Aunt Catherine pulled him away for another congratulation, and the moment dissolved. That's when I felt it, the weight of the flash drive in my pocket. Digital conversion of the old VHS tape I'd found last week while clearing out my childhood bedroom. The one innocuously labeled Family Beach Trip 93 in my mother's neat handwriting. I'd watched it alone in my apartment, thinking it might contain happy memories. Instead, it had revealed the foundation of lies my entire identity was built upon. My fingers closed around the flash drive. The moment crystallized with remarkable clarity, the murmur of congratulations, the clink of glasses, the perfect family tableau I'd never truly been part of. Years of therapy had taught me to recognize pivotal moments when they arrived. This was one. There would be a before and after this night, with no bridge back once crossed. "I have a surprise too," I said, my voice cracking slightly as I stood. Few people even turned to look. The Morrison family's second son wasn't known for memorable announcements. I walked to the projector setup meant for the anniversary slideshow and plugged in my laptop, hands steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "Alex," my mother called, her voice carrying that familiar warning tone she'd used whenever I threatened to embarrass the family. Her pearl earrings caught the light as she tilted her head in admonishment. "Now's not the time for your hobby." The word hobby hung in the air like a slap. 15 years of professional work, exhibitions in New York and Paris, a spread in National Geographic, all reduced to a hobby in her eyes. I'd stopped expecting her approval somewhere around college, but the dismissal still found its mark with painful accuracy. "It'll just take a minute," I replied, louder now, the tremble gone from my voice. "I found something everyone should see. Some old family footage. Very illuminating." That caught James's attention. He disengaged from his adoring circle and approached quickly, champagne glass still in hand, expensive Italian shoes clicking against the hardwood. His surgeon's eyes, observant, analytical, scanned my face with growing concern. "Hey, little brother," he said, voice low, resting a manicured hand on my shoulder. The Rolex on his wrist probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Let's not hijack Mom and Dad's big day, okay? We can look at your videos later. I'll even host a viewing at our place." His smile was genuine but patronizing, the smile of someone used to managing difficult situations and difficult people with practiced charm. "This can't wait," I replied, looking him directly in the eyes. I let the mask slip, just enough for him to see the storm behind my carefully maintained composure. Something in my expression must have alarmed him because he took a step back, the confident smile faltering. For a microsecond, I glimpsed uncertainty in the golden child, a rare sight that, under different circumstances, might have given me satisfaction. The projector hummed to life, casting its blue glow across the grand ballroom's wall. Conversations dwindled as curiosity drew eyes toward the impromptu screening. My throat tightened. There was still time to stop, to smile, and claim it was a technical error, to retreat back to my corner. But the weight of 35 years pressed against my spine, straightening it, propelling me forward. The first few minutes showed exactly what the label promised: our family at the beach in 1993. The footage was slightly grainy, filmed on Dad's prized Sony Handycam, a technological marvel at the time. 10-year-old James dominated the center frame, building an award-worthy sandcastle with the same methodical precision he would later bring to operating rooms. I, 7 years old, hovered nearby, desperately trying to help only to be shooed away, my smaller castle repeatedly washed away by the tide. "Look at James's architectural skills," Mom's voice cooed from behind the camera when Dad handed it to her. "He's got your engineering mind, Robert." Meanwhile, I sat nearby, carefully arranging shells in a pattern nobody noticed or commented on. When the camera briefly swept over me, you could see my small face looking up expectantly, waiting for praise that never came. Standard Morrison family dynamics, immortalized on magnetic tape. A few people chuckled at the retro bathing suits and hairstyles. Others whispered about how much James looked like Dad even then. I noticed my mother's expression softening at the memories, her hand reaching briefly for my father's. Then the scene changed abruptly. The timestamp jumped ahead several hours. Dad had apparently forgotten to stop recording when he set the camera down on our beach house deck later that night. The lens captured a slice of dark sky and wooden railing, but the audio came through with perfect, damning clarity. Dad was alone, drinking scotch, talking to someone on the phone. His words slurred but distinct in the silent ballroom. "I can't take it anymore, Margaret," he said to his sister, my aunt who had died years ago. "No, they don't suspect anything. The boy looks just like me, thank God." A bitter laugh. "The other one? Who knows, doesn't have any of my features. Not my chin, not my eyes, nothing of me in him at all. Sometimes I look at him and just see her betrayal staring back at me." The ice clinked against his glass. How am I supposed to love a living reminder that my wife fucked another man? The room went completely silent. Someone dropped a fork, the clatter almost violent in the stillness. My mother's face drained of color so rapidly I thought she might faint. James stood frozen, champagne glass suspended halfway to his lips. Sarah, his wife, covered her mouth with manicured fingers. And that's when Dad lunged for the laptop, knocking over 2 wine glasses in his desperate rush to silence the past. "Turn that damn thing off now. I never meant to ruin the party," I whispered, my finger hovering over the play button as 50 pairs of eyes stared at me in stunned silence. Dad lunged across the table, knocking over 2 wine glasses. "Turn that damn thing off now." I stepped back, protecting the computer with surprising steadiness. A strange calm had settled over me. The calm of someone who has finally struck the match after years of gathering kindling. "There's more," I said, my voice carrying in the shocked silence. "Much more. 35 years more." Mom stumbled to her feet, her perfectly coiffed hair now slightly askew, the veneer of social poise cracking along with her voice. "Please," she begged, hand outstretched toward me, diamond tennis bracelet glinting under the chandelier lights. "Not here, not like this." Her eyes darted around the room, cataloging witnesses to the family's implosion. The mayor, Dad's law partners, their country club friends, distant relatives with suddenly very attentive expressions. Dad's face had turned a dangerous shade of purple, the vein in his forehead throbbing visibly. The same vein that had terrified me as a child when my report cards didn't match James's perfect grades. "You ungrateful little..." He caught himself, suddenly aware of the audience, of the carefully constructed image of respectability and success he'd curated for 4 decades. He forced a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Old vacation videos. Alex always had an imagination, always making up stories. His eyes told a different story, pure, undiluted rage barely contained behind the social mask. But the damage was done. Whispers skittered around the edges of the room like mice. James stood frozen several feet away, champagne forgotten in his hand, staring at me with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. The Golden Sun's perfect world beginning to tilt on its axis. "What's he talking about, Dad?" James asked, his surgeon's composure cracking for the first time since medical school. The authority in his voice, the voice that commanded operating rooms and medical residents, wavered slightly. "What betrayal?" And Catherine, my mother's oldest friend, slowly sat back down, her hand reaching for her water glass instead of her wine. The mayor's wife leaned over to whisper something in his ear. 2 of my father's colleagues exchanged uncomfortable glances. The carefully choreographed anniversary celebration was unraveling thread by thread, the audience shifting from celebration to spectacle mode with practiced social discretion. I pressed play again, fast-forwarding to another clip. This time, Dad was arguing with Mom in their bedroom, unaware of the camera I'd left running during my early experimental photography phase. "Can never know," Dad shouted. "James is my son. Mine. The other one. I've done my duty, haven't I? Raised him like my own, even though every time I look at him I see him." I paused the video again. The anniversary cake sat forgotten on its table. Relatives were whispering, some discreetly gathering their belongings. "Alex, please," my mother pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "Not like this." But decades of being the family disappointment, the mysterious other child who never quite fit, had hardened something in me. "When were you planning to tell me? On your deathbed?" "Never." Dad straightened his tie, attempting to regain control. "Everyone, please excuse this unfortunate interruption. My younger son has always had emotional issues." The familiar dismissal ignited something in me. I pulled out a folded paper from my jacket pocket. "I had a DNA test done last week. Would you like to know the results, Dad? Or should I say, Robert?" Mom collapsed back into her chair. James set down his glass with a shaking hand and walked toward me, his face unreadable. "Give me that," he said, reaching for the paper. I handed it over. "Congratulations, James. You're 100% Morrison. The golden child with the golden genes." He scanned the results, physician's eyes taking in the scientific proof. When he looked up, the betrayal in his eyes wasn't directed at me, but at our parents. "You lied to him his entire life?" he asked them, voice clinical but trembling slightly. "To all of us?" Dad's authority finally crumbled. "You don't understand," he mumbled. "It was complicated. Your mother, there was a time." I turned to the shocked guests. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate 40 years of marriage built on lies. There are party favors by the door." As people began awkwardly filtering out, my Aunt Beth, Mom's sister, approached me. She'd always been kind, the only one who seemed to see me. "I suspected," she whispered, squeezing my arm. "The timing, the way Robert changed toward you. I should have said something. You knew." I pulled away, feeling another betrayal. I had suspicions, not proof. "Your mother swore you were Robert's when I asked." She looked at my mother with sadness. "Helen, how could you let him grow up like this?" Mom couldn't meet her gaze. Instead, she turned to me, desperation in her eyes. "We can explain everything. Please, Alex, not like this. We're still family." Family. The word tasted bitter. I was never family. I was the living reminder of something you wanted to forget. James stood beside me now, surprising me. "Who was his father?" he demanded. Dad's face twisted with old rage. "Ask your mother about her old photography teacher, David Mercer. Ask her what private lessons really meant." The name hit me like a physical blow. David Mercer was a renowned photographer I'd admired for years, whose work had inspired my own career. The coincidence seemed too cruel to be real. "Mom," my voice sounded small, like the child I'd once been, desperate for her attention. She couldn't look at me. He was brilliant, passionate about his art. It was a mistake. I ended it as soon as I knew I was pregnant. Came back to your father. He agreed to raise you as his own if we never spoke of it. Raise me? I laughed bitterly. Is that what you call what happened? Constant comparison to James? The disapproving looks? The why can't you be more like your brother? I tried. Dad shouted, mask finally dropping completely. Every day I looked at you and saw him. The man who nearly destroyed our family. How do you think that felt? James stepped between us. Stop it, Dad. This isn't his fault. Of course you defend him now, Dad sneered. St. James, always so perfect. Something broke in James's expression. Perfect? You think it was easy being your real son? The pressure, the expectations? At least Alex got to follow his passion while I was forced into medicine because Morrisons are doctors. I stared at my brother, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. You never said anything. What was I supposed to say? Sorry, our parents obviously prefer me? I was a kid too, Alex. The revelation that James might have suffered differently under our parents' twisted dynamics momentarily stunned me. But it didn't erase 35 years of being the outsider. I turned back to my laptop and pressed play one final time. Another clip appeared. Dad, drunk again, talking to James at his medical school graduation party. Proud of you, son. My real son. Not like him with his useless pictures. Sometimes I wish your mother had just gotten rid. I shut the laptop as collective gasps filled the room. Even Dad looked ashamed. I think we're done here, I said quietly. Congratulations on 40 years of lies. As I packed up my equipment, Mom grabbed my arm. Please, Alex. He didn't mean it. He loves you in his way. His way wasn't enough. I gently removed her hand. By the way, David Mercer is having a retrospective exhibition next month in New York. Might be time for a family reunion. I turned to leave, but James blocked my path. For a moment, I thought he might hit me. Instead, he pulled me into an awkward hug. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear I didn't know. Would it have changed anything if you did? I asked. He pulled back, conflict clear in his eyes. I don't know, but I know I don't want to lose my brother. Half-brother, Dad corrected automatically from behind us. Mom elbowed him hard. I looked at James, the golden child, the perfect son, the brother who'd always seemed as unreachable as the stars. I need time, I said finally. This doesn't just disappear because it's inconvenient for everyone. Take time? James nodded. But take this too. He pressed a business card into my hand. My private number. When you're ready to talk. If you're ready, I'll answer. As I walked out of the ballroom, leaving the wreckage of 40 years of family mythology behind me, I felt oddly light. The truth had cost me the illusion of family, but perhaps it had given me something more valuable, freedom from seeking approval I'd never receive. Outside, the Seattle rain washed over me as I stepped through the ornate hotel doors. The doorman, who had greeted the Morrison family with deferential smiles earlier, now watched me with poorly concealed curiosity. News traveled fast among service staff. I didn't care. The cool droplets mingled with tears I hadn't realized I was shedding, cleansing me as I breathed deeply for what felt like the first time in decades. The weight I'd carried since childhood, the desperate need for validation, the constant falling short, the undefined sense of wrongness, suddenly had a name, a reason. I wasn't Robert Morrison's son. I never had been. The revelation should have devastated me, but instead, it felt like liberation. A key turning in a lock I hadn't known existed. My phone buzzed insistently in my pocket as I walked aimlessly through downtown Seattle, past gleaming office towers and late-night coffee shops. My mother had called 3 times. James twice. I ignored them all until a text from Aunt Beth appeared. Your real father's been trying to find you for years. When you're ready, I have his contact information. I stopped walking, the rain intensifying around me, pedestrians with umbrellas flowing around my stillness like water around a stone. David Mercer. The name Dad had spat out like poison. The renowned photographer whose work I'd studied in college, whose compositions had influenced my own without knowing why they resonated so deeply. I stared at the message for a long moment before putting my phone away. For tonight, being just Alex, not a Morrison, not a disappointment, just myself, was enough. Tomorrow would bring its own reckonings. I spent the following days in a strange limbo, ignoring the increasingly desperate messages from my mother while diving into research about David Mercer. His retrospectives at MoMA and the Tate. His iconic black and white studies of urban isolation. His teaching position at the Art Institute where my mother had studied briefly before marrying Dad. The timeline aligned perfectly with my birth. I found myself studying my reflection with new eyes, noticing features that had never made sense in the Morrison family, the slight arch of my eyebrows, the particular way my mouth curved when concentrating, the sensitivity to light that had shaped my photography. All Mercer traits, obvious once you knew to look. 3 weeks later, I sat in a coffee shop in Capitol Hill, my heart hammering against my ribs as I watched the door. When he walked in, I knew him instantly, though he was older than in his photographs. David Mercer moved with deliberate grace, scanning the room with a photographer's observant eyes, my eyes, until they found me. "Alex," he said simply, his voice catching slightly as he approached. We sat across from each other, biological father and son, separated by 35 years and a small wooden table. David was leaner than I'd expected, his silver hair still thick, his hands marked with the same long fingers as mine. He ordered a black coffee. So did I. The barista called our identical orders, and we both smiled at the coincidence. "You have her smile," he said quietly. "But everything else, that's all from my side." We talked for hours, carefully circling each other with increasing openness. About light and composition, about capturing truth through images. About how he'd fallen desperately in love with a married art student named Helen, who returned to her husband when she discovered she was pregnant. He never made excuses for the affair, but he revealed something that changed everything. "I wrote to you for years. Birthday cards, Christmas cards. Your mother returned them all." His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his worn leather messenger bag. "I kept copies. Thought someday maybe." He showed me one he still carried, a card for my 10th birthday with a small camera drawn on it. Inside, he'd written, "To my son, who I hope will one day see the world through his own lens." I remembered that birthday, the custom baseball glove from Dad that I'd never used, Mom's tight smile when I seemed uninterested in the sports equipment, the void where understanding should have been. Somehow, without knowing it, I'd followed his path. DNA expressing itself despite family pressure, despite never knowing the truth, despite Robert Morrison's attempts to mold me into something, anything, other than what I naturally was. "When I saw your name in photography circles," David said, eyes glistening, "I knew it was you. Same age, same city, Morrison was your mother's married name. I tried to reach out through galleries, but I wasn't ready to hear it," I finished. "I wouldn't have believed it without proof." That night, I received a long email from James, confessing his own struggles under the weight of our parents' expectations and expressing regret for not protecting me better. It wasn't an instant fix, but it was a start. I never returned to my parents' home, but I did send them something, a framed photograph of David and me at his exhibition, standing in front of my work he'd proudly displayed alongside his own. On the back, I wrote simply, "Some family ties are chosen. My mother calls sometimes. Dad never does. I let her messages go to voicemail more often than not. Some betrayals cut too deep for easy forgiveness. But each morning, I wake without the weight of seeking approval I'll never receive. I capture the world through my lens, my true inheritance, and let the images speak truths my family never could." Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.